to kick things off, just to kind of lay the groundwork for our audience today, could you kind of tell us a story how, well, you started from AI and kind of ended up in human health? It's not a transformation I think we see with a lot of people, right?
It's
So could you
unusual.
it is unusual for
Yes,
sure. So can
yeah.
you like walk me through this process, where you started, where did you end up? Because I think it's quite interesting.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Actually, my career has been, it took a major turn. In 2007, I just completely changed directions while keeping the same funding, the same funding source. So that was pretty amazing. But it starts all the way back in college at MIT, undergraduate. Got my degree in biology, actually. So,
Ah,
and it was already a transition to go from biology to computer science. I got into
uh-huh.
the PhD program in computer science and majored in that and got an MS, EE, and PhD degrees. So three
Uh-huh.
more degrees, but all in the sort of computer science, electrical engineering area. So I had this kind of eclectic background with the biology plus the computer science, and I always loved biology. I always kept up with it, but my job was really writing code. So I worked at MIT. I've been working at MIT ever since I graduated. Um, and I developed I was one of those early pioneers in developing code that would allow computers to communicate with humans using natural spoken language.
Mhm.
And back in the day, we were really probably built the first sort of spoken language system where we could talk to the computer. We had a navigation assistance program, and you have to ask a question and go away and have a cup of coffee while it thinks about the answer because it's so slow, right? It's like it was completely impractical. I remember at the time I was thinking, this is never going to be practical. This is never, why are they funding me to do this? Because it's never going to work. But of course, things got a lot faster. And then, and eventually it became commoditized to the point where my job was kind of in jeopardy. I was so 2007, and I'd written all this code, and we'd develop all these early pioneer systems for things like now you call up to try to get help. You're calling to get a service, and you've got to answer questions with this computer robot, which I hate that actually. And so I feel like I was one of the people who's responsible for making that happen, which is annoying.
But
I
was
would
it
have
more like a speech to text technology or kind of text to speech or
We were
both?
doing actually dialogue, which was quite unusual at the
Mm.
time. Back in the late
Uh-huh.
1980s,
Uh-huh.
human-computer dialogue, spoken language, which had
Mm.
all kinds of challenges because the recognition
Can
was pretty
imagine.
bad. You had all kinds of
Yeah.
errors, and then you had to figure out with this garbled text what was the person really trying to say. It was a very challenging task that we took on, and it's amazing how well it works now. I'm really astonished, actually. I appreciate how hard it is because we worked on it, but so, anyway, 2007, my field was becoming commoditized, and I was kind of worried as to where my job was changing because I couldn't be the person who
Uh-huh.
writes the code anymore because other people were doing that in the
Mhm.
companies, and I had to find some value added to what they were doing. We're hitting a similar crisis right now with AI. The way the AI has emerged in the last few years, it's incredible what it can do. It's really mind blowing to me, especially because again, I know what it was like back then. And people in our field, like at MIT right now, the professors are struggling to figure out what they should teach, because it's not
Mhm.
just a matter of being a good code writer anymore. In fact, that's probably pretty useless at this point because the computer can
Mhm.
write the code. So it's
Yeah.
going to be very disruptive of our field. So anyway, 2007, I was watching the autism rates go up every year, and I was really worried. And of course, the government said we're just diagnosing it more. Don't worry, it's not a problem. But I didn't think so. I thought there's something going on. It's got to be environmental. And so I just decided to pivot. And at that point, I pitched the proposal to my funder. I'd like to do this now instead of what I was doing before. And I was developing, computer games to teach a person speaking English how to speak Chinese. So that's how different it was
Mhm.
at that point. That's what I was working on.
Mhm.
And I dropped that and moved on to this. And I've been very happy with this. With the outcome. I really love the science. I just love it. And I feel like I'm I collaborate with people who are really smart, who are
Mhm.
doing breakthrough ideas. I believe in biology. I think the field of biology is going to be revolutionized in the coming years. And in part by the technology, because you really can get so much faster. Anyone who wants to learn about biology, you don't need a teacher anymore because of the
Mhm.
AI, really, because you can just ask the computer and the computer can give you all kinds of detailed answers with references to papers, and you can just go from there. You don't need a teacher to learn
Mhm.
biology anymore, which is really uplifting, very exciting, actually. So anyway, I got into biology, and then I was
Mhm.
determined to figure out the cause of autism, and that's where I focused. And I looked for 5 years, 2007 to 2012. I studied everything I could about autism. I was looking at different possible exposures and
Mhm.
striking out. I mean, I knew that there was a problem with the gut, and I thought it must be something in the food or something in the water. That I was there,
Mhm.
but I didn't know what. And then what happened was I was at a conference in 2012, and I heard a lecture, 2-hour presentation by Professor Don Huber. He's over 80 years old, maybe well over 80 at this point, and he's still going strong. So he's pretty amazing. He just published a paper a couple months ago, excellent paper on glyphosate. So he's amazing. And he gave this presentation, and he had a lot of information that lined up really well with what I perceived with autism. I was like, oh my God, this is it. I was so excited. And I went back and started reading everything I could about glyphosate. That's the active ingredient in Roundup. No
Mhm.
longer, by the way, here in the United States, when they sell Roundup to the residential market, they've
Mhm.
taken the glyphosate out. They've quietly taken it out and replaced it with a bunch of other chemicals that are probably considered to be worse than glyphosate. So it's not like an improvement, but they recognize all the lawsuits happening in America has forced the company, which is Bayer now. It used to be Monsanto. They got bought out by Bayer.
Mhm.
They've taken it out of the residential market product in the past year or so.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's yeah. So the glyphosate. I really felt I had found my answer, and the more I looked, the more convinced I was, and that's still true to this day. I still feel it's not the only thing that causes autism, but it's the primary cause of the epidemic.
Can you explain this like I'm 5? Let's say, assume person has never heard of this, don't know anything, nor about autism or about this glyphosate, nothing. How would you explain this to me in simple terms? How does it work? Why does it work? What's kind of the science backing there? What's still theory? Like, could you try to make this simple for me? Because it's not
That's
a
what's
field that I'm an
challenging.
expert
It's
in,
not simple. That's the problem. It's really not simple, and it's really
Yeah.
it takes a lot of studying to figure it out. And of course,
Mhm.
we haven't entirely figured it out, but I have a lot of ideas about it.
Mhm.
Glyphosate is a unique chemical. It's an amino acid analog of glycine.
Mhm.
Glycine is an amino acid. It's the smallest amino acid, and amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and the
Mhm.
proteins are the workhorses of the body. They're made through the DNA code, the famous DNA code with the 4 letters and this 3-letter sequences. 3-letter code codes for each amino acid, and it's like a program that the enzymes just go ahead and put those amino acids together like paper dolls on a string
Mhm.
to make the protein. And it's
Mhm.
amazing biology, actually. The proteins are just so incredible. And glycine is, as I said, the smallest amino acid. Glyphosate is a glycine molecule, but it has extra material stuck onto its nitrogen atom, which makes it behave very differently. But it
Mhm.
fits into this place where glycine goes during the assembly process. So my suspicion is that it's replacing glycine during protein synthesis. This is a big deal. It's something that the industry has denied vehemently. They say it can't happen. So we definitely have a difference of opinion there.
Mhm.
But their own studies, I think, basically proved that it's happening. And I have my book, Toxic Legacy, which
Mhm.
and I devoted a whole chapter to this. Actually, it's a central feature of my book, is my argument that glyphosate does indeed substitute for glycine. And when it does so in certain proteins, it can cause them to misbehave miserably, like they just totally don't work anymore according to what they're supposed to do. And then those proteins become defective. And essentially, as you eat foods which contain glyphosate, and it is all over the food supply in the United States, that I can prove because my friend Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America. She was the founder of Moms Across America, and she's published various. She's done a lot of studies on different categories of food, and she's had her moms collect, school lunches. She's had them collect fast food, send it off for testing. 100% of the fast food samples were contaminated with glyphosate, and something like
Mhm.
95% of the school lunches. So it's like pervasive in the food supply, especially the processed foods in America,
Mhm.
and it's reflected in a lot of health issues, not just autism. There's a huge list of diseases and conditions that are rising in prevalence over time, over
But
since
so
2000.
basically, to make it super simple, there's like the protein, and there's an element that should dock kind of to this protein or should be part of the protein. And then there's food we eat, and this element is basically being substituted by something else which is actually very harmful for you. Kind of to really boil it down in a super
That's
simple way,
great.
right?
That's the perfect way to say it. And of course,
Yeah.
there's also other things that make it toxic, which
Uh-huh.
possibly that's the whole story and this isn't
Uh-huh.
happening, but I believe this is what makes it really, really special because that's a
Uh-huh.
unique feature of glyphosate. I don't know of any other chemical that does that. That makes it really,
Uh-huh.
really unique. But although there are other chemicals that substitute for other amino acids, but not glycine. So it's not like that doesn't happen.
Uh-huh.
And that's definitely a cause of serious problems with those chemicals. So, using that as evidence, and then the fact that the industry has found there's an enzyme called EPSP synthase, which is it famously disrupts that enzyme, and that they think is its main primary mechanism of toxicity. That
Uh-huh.
enzyme has a glycine residue at a place where it binds a molecule containing phosphate, and if you replace that glycine in the code with alanine, you change the sequence so there's no glycine there anymore. That
Uh-huh.
protein becomes completely insensitive to glyphosate. So that's like a really strong indicator that
Uh-huh.
the issue is the glyphosate is substituting for the glycine in the protein as opposed to substituting for the phosphate containing uh, substrate that binds to the protein. So it's a
Uh-huh.
different argument for how it works, but it doesn't make sense if it's acting as a substrate. It doesn't make sense that when you change glycine to alanine, it completely disrupts glyphosate's ability to do anything. It ought to be more subtle. It should just be worse, but not terrible, because it
Uh-huh.
completely becomes ineffective if you change the glycine to alanine. And that's the basis of the GMO Roundup Ready crops. They put in a microbial gene for a
Uh-huh.
version of this EPSP synthase that has alanine instead of glycine. That's one extra methyl group in the protein that completely desensitizes it from glyphosate. So
Uh-huh.
I feel that's one of the strongest arguments to say that it does substitute for glycine. And it is a glycine
Uh-huh.
molecule, so it should substitute. It fits.
Mhm. I guess there's two ways to tackle this kind of question or flow. The first one is what kind of foods we eat that might contain this, right? Or actually, no, we can even take one step before. What kind of things are they doing to the food? And then what kind of food contains that, second? And then what actually happens, kind of, I don't know, technically speaking, if this kind of goes into the protein, Could you
Yeah.
try to kind of explain in simple terms this whole value chain? I know it's not easy to break it down, but if
Yeah.
you could kind of try to put this in these three buckets, that
Right.
would be very helpful, I think.
Right. And in fact, which foods contain it is an issue because a lot of people think if I buy non-GMO, and in Europe you have labeling, which is nice. We
Mhm.
don't. We get
Mhm.
labels on the ones that don't have GMO because we don't have a law that says you have to label GMO. And
Mhm.
so people are careful. They'll buy something that says non-GMO and they'll think, oh, that's good. I don't have to worry. But that's not true because actually some of the highest levels of glyphosate are found in foods derived from non-GMO crops. And that's because they actually use it. They use it to kill weeds, first of all. I guess I should say
Mhm.
that. And
Mhm.
it's very effective. It kills all plants, which is also quite worrisome because plants have
Mhm.
a lot in common with us. So it's naive to think that, oh, it kills all plants, but it doesn't harm us at all. That's extremely
Mhm.
naive, just to believe that.
Mhm.
Um, and so it kills all plants except for the ones that have been engineered with this gene that I told you about that has this alanine instead of glycine in the protein, in the code for the
Mhm.
protein, so that it doesn't make that version of the protein that's vulnerable to glyphosate. And then that's no problem. You can spray it, and the APSP synthase works fine, and the plant lives. It has effects on the plants, but it doesn't disrupt that particular protein, which is
Mhm.
extremely important for plants. Obviously, if that protein's not working, the plant dies. It's also very important for microbes, and we have a lot of microbes in our gut that have a version of that enzyme that has the glycine that's sensitive to glyphosate. So it is disrupting our gut microbiome, and that is a key part of its toxicity is the disruption of the gut microbiome. So where are we now?
Mhm.
What was your
But
next
so
question?
basically, the problem is that these food producers, to break it down, they kind of use these materials that are kind of genetically modified, I guess, and
Yes.
that then, of course, stays in the food, right? So that they try
Right,
kind of
so
to
there's a
save.
question of the GMO itself, and in fact, it's
Yeah.
interesting because when they evaluated the GMO to see if it was safe, so they have this GMO, they put this bacterial gene, pretty
Mhm.
amazing technology, by the way,
Mhm.
scary, scary amazing what they can do these days with genetics. So they put this gene into the plant, and then the plant doesn't die when it gets exposed to glyphosate. But the gene, of course, there's a question of whether having that gene makes the plant uh, toxic, the gene itself, the
Mhm.
modification. And when
Uh-huh.
they studied that, they grew the plants organically. They didn't expose them to any glyphosate to see if they were safe to eat, which is a huge flaw because when they're exposed to glyphosate, first of all, that changes them. They actually produce a different set of molecules as a consequence of that glyphosate exposure. And of course, there's also glyphosate contamination. And so
Uh-huh.
they of course are going to use glyphosate when they grow the
Uh-huh.
plant. That's the whole point of having the GMO. But when
Uh-huh.
they studied it, they grew it organically. I was really shocked to find that out. They just
Uh-huh.
asked the question, is the GMO safe by itself, but when you
Yeah,
put
and
the glyphosate with it, it changes everything.
it's always the same, right? Whoever does the study is kind of the one who determines if they like the result at the end, and if they don't, they're just not going to publish it. So
Yes.
it's you
They
can really follow the money, I think. That's true with
Yeah,
all.
they do
That's true with
tricks.
all things.
They do that with the glyphosate too because they
Yeah.
studied the glyphosate in isolation to see if it was
Uh-huh.
toxic. And then they used it in formulations with all kinds of extra adjuvants inside it and surfactants, things that would help to get the glyphosate into the crop, make it more
Uh-huh.
toxic, basically, and also things that are also toxic in and of themselves. The formulation has a bunch of other stuff in there
Uh-huh.
that makes the glyphosate very different from what it was without by itself. And they
Uh-huh.
studied it by itself. So they basically are sort of isolating these things to
Uh-huh.
minimize the chance of having a problem because they want
Yeah.
to get past the regulatory process. And that's worked. And so they've gotten it approved. And in Europe and in America, they keep approving it, and of course they think that we can't live without it at this point, which is really ridiculous because we lived without it, for how many millions of years up until the point when we had it. How could
Uh-huh.
we suddenly not be able to survive without it anymore? I find it very frustrating that the government seem to believe that it's essential for our agriculture at this point. And so they're, even in the United States, they're starting to, the industry is pressuring at the country level, at the government, national government, and also at the state level, individual states. They're pressuring them to pass bills. They're setting up bills and trying to get them to pass these bills that would essentially give glyphosate an exemption from
Uh-huh.
lawsuits because we have a
Mm.
tremendous problem with these lawsuits on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And you
Uh-huh.
probably know about that.
Uh-huh.
Dwayne Lee Johnson was the first one.
Uh-huh.
He was a school grounds keeper, so he was spraying glyphosate on the grounds of where children played, which is already horrible, right?
Uh-huh.
So that
Uh-huh.
was his job, and he developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in his 40s. He had 2 young kids, and he sued the company, and he won a huge amount of money, 280 million or something like that. It got
Mm.
cut way back eventually, but the initial award was enormous. And
Uh-huh.
then others, there's a drove of people who all of a sudden came out of the woodwork with their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I think there's like over 100,000 cases at this point pending,
Uh-huh.
and the industry is just drowning in the cost of trying to handle all these lawsuits. And so
Uh-huh.
they're kind of arguing that their argument is glyphosate is essential. We can't live without it. So if we're going to have all these lawsuits, we're going to have to stop making the product, and then we're going to be in horrible trouble with starvation. So
Uh-huh.
they're trying to make a case that the state needs to pass a law that says that no matter how sick you are from having been exposed to glyphosate, you can't sue. You can't sue the company.
Because to me, it kind of sounds logical. The less you kind of interfere with nature, the better, for your food, for everything.
Absolutely, that is so
So,
true. So true.
what can I eat uh, and not eat this? You know what I mean? Like, what
Yes.
should I avoid? What should I eat? Maybe first part of the question, then second part of the question. You already mentioned a couple of things, but what's kind of the most common things you see if someone has really too much exposure to this thing?
Right. So in terms of eating, and certainly you see a whole bunch of different opinions about diet, low fat, high fat, low carb. There's all this confusion about diet. My main principle would be certified organic, which luckily we do
Uh-huh.
have that as a label in this country, and it's pretty accessible. I mean, we've been able to buy, ever since I discovered glyphosate, we've gone certified organic in my household every time we shop at the grocery store.
Uh-huh.
If we can't find it with that label, we have to do without it. We're very strict, and I
Uh-huh.
think it's helped our improve our health. And so,
Uh-huh.
so that's very important. Of course, even certified organic can have glyphosate in it, not because they used it or if they cheated, maybe, but
Uh-huh.
because it's in the rain, for
Uh-huh.
example. It's in the manure, so they
Uh-huh.
can't avoid it completely. But
Uh-huh.
usually much lower levels in the organic foods.
Because
So
we
that,
have the same, in Switzerland. It's called kind of, well, bio, we call it, but I guess it's the same.
yeah, I
And
think
you
so.
really see in the supermarket the the biological version, I don't know, even of a lemon, whatever, is so beautiful and yellow and really the color it should be, and then
Yes.
the normal version
Yeah.
is, I don't know, almost white,
I
like it
see.
just
I
doesn't
know.
compare. So
I think it's
it
both
already
more
looks off,
better
no matter
nutrition.
what they do.
Yes, well, the glyphosate disrupts the ability of the plants to take up minerals, and including
Hmm.
sulfur. I mean, that was one of the things that Don Huber talked about in his lecture. The
Hmm.
plants lose a lot of their value in terms of micronutrients as a consequence of being exposed to glyphosate. Even when they're GMO, they can't
Hmm.
take up those minerals, and so they
Hmm.
become deficient. So you have a deficient diet that's too many calories compared to the key micronutrients that you really need to be well, which is the minerals, the vitamins, and even all the polyphenols. The plants have
Hmm.
all kinds of really interesting products that they make, and under stress, which is when they're exposed to glyphosate, they make a different set of products that can be toxic to us. So
Hmm.
there's a change in the plants, what the plant contains when the plant is exposed to toxic chemicals like glyphosate. And I'm sure the other
Hmm.
ones too that they're exposed to, because we use a lot of chemicals. Glyphosate's only one of several different herbicides, and there's also a
Hmm.
bunch of different insecticides and fungicides. We use them all, on our food. So our food has become toxic, and I think we really need to. The government needs to work hard on figuring out how to go back to
Hmm.
completely organic agriculture, no,
Hmm.
none of these synthetic chemicals, and still be productive and be profitable, because
Hmm.
the question is, having a whole bunch of people out there pulling weeds is very not cost effective. So to figure
Yeah.
out a different way, and I think there's a path, using technology, because there are these smart tractors that are showing up, that can self-driving, solar powered, and
Hmm.
they have vision, so they can recognize a weed. They can identify it as a weed. Then they can spray it with boiling water or something like that. So they can be very specific. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm idealist, but I think it's possible that we could use technology to help to get control the weeds
Hmm.
safely without
Hmm.
poisoning ourselves. And we need to do that. We need to find a way.
Because I remember I was in the States maybe half a year ago, and in Switzerland, I know the onions are maybe like this, like normal size, and in the US, I saw
They're
onions like
so
this.
huge.
You've never like half the size of my freaking head, like you wouldn't believe it, and I was like,
Yeah.
guys, this is an onion. There must be some. I mean, I never saw an onion
Yeah.
like this in my life,
I know, that's
and
interesting,
this is
isn't it?
really probably the effect of just, I don't know, too much treatment, too much of all the bad stuff, right? Because it just,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look normal at all, especially in the
That's
US.
interesting, yeah, and the tomatoes, of course, are terrible. I
Tomatoes
mean,
as well. Yeah, I mean, that's true. But
they don't, I mean,
it
not big,
especially
but
stood
they
out to
taste
the
bad, and they're
onions.
not red. They don't have
Yeah.
any flavor. I think that tomatoes are really,
Mm-hmm.
they're not able to express themselves fully to be
Mm-hmm.
the kind of nutritious, wonderful tomato that you get in
Mm-hmm.
Europe. I've noticed that
Mm-hmm.
myself, that the European tomatoes are much tastier than ours.
Yeah, and a European tomato, I don't know, maybe it will be like you could easily comfortably put it in your mouth, in one piece
Yes.
if you want. But with the US tomatoes, I mean, it's gonna fill your whole head, right? So it's not gonna work.
I guess we have big tomatoes as well.
Yeah.
And we have big people also.
Exactly. Yeah, you do. That's right. You do.
Uh, mhm.
Yeah. So basically, it's just try to avoid stuff that has been kind of modified too much, the food, right? Try to stay as
Yes.
organic as
So
possible,
and
as
also
untouched as
minimal
possible.
processing is the other thing, minimal processing.
Mm.
So eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in a balanced diet, so I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe in vegan. I think you miss out on some critical nutrients when
Mm-hmm.
you go vegan. So
Mm-hmm.
meats and dairy. I think dairy is great. Fermented foods is really important. Sauerkraut, which is a big one in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we keep sauerkraut on handy all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very good because it's got fiber, which is important for the gut microbiome. You want to make sure your gut microbiome is happy. That is so crucial, because so many people here have issues with their gut,
Mm-hmm.
imbalanced gut microbiome, inflammation in the gut, chronic. So inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, sensitivity to wheat. That is probably
Mm-hmm.
due to glyphosate, because glyphosate is in the wheat. Wheat is a non-GMO crop, but it's one of those crops that's sprayed right before harvest. So we have actually the wheat, the barley, it's the grains, the wheat, the barley, the oats, and also the legumes, the
Mm-hmm.
chickpeas and the garbanzo beans and the lentils. They're all heavily contaminated with glyphosate if they're not organic.
Hmm.
So you
But
have
there is a way to eat pasta that is organic, right? And then you
Oh,
basically gonna avoid
absolutely. You can
that.
buy organic
Yeah.
noodles, which we do, and we
Mm-hmm.
love spaghetti. We just had it last night,
Mm-hmm.
actually. So,
Uh-huh.
and organic pasta, which we actually buy pasta from Italy because
Uh-huh.
it's
Uh-huh.
much better than the American pasta. America
Uh-huh.
does not do well on its foods.
Uh-huh.
I have to say, it's just disappointing. But
Because it's actually funny. Um, My mom back then, probably 10 years ago, like a long time ago, she ordered like these tests for us, and we all tested the glyphosate levels, in our
oh,
body. And me, actually, I ended up having by far the highest level you've
really?
ever seen, honestly. And I was eating pasta all day, every day, like that
Oh,
was all I was eating. And yeah, I kind of tried to just, yeah, go more organic and just really
yes,
try to control that and feel much better, of course. Honestly, I personally didn't have any, I guess, luckily, any of these really bad symptoms, So,
yes,
but yeah, the value I had was super, super high. And now my question is this something that the body will flush out, eventually,
right.
or is this something that kind of stays with you forever?
Well, that is the big question, and
Mm.
they claim that it passes away quickly, like in
Uh-huh.
maybe in a couple of weeks,
Uh-huh.
either through the feces or through the urine, or maybe sweating it out through the skin. It leaves, but not all of it. Some of
Mm-hmm.
it accumulates, and that's what becomes very, very serious because a certain small percentage of the glyphosate that you're exposed to, I think, ends up in your proteins, and it
Uh-huh.
ends up in your proteins throughout your body. And in some of those proteins, it causes a really bad problem. And
Uh-huh.
so you basically accumulate what I call bullets, glyphosate
Uh-huh.
bullets throughout your body. And depending upon which particular proteins get hit the hardest, you get different diseases. So
Uh-huh.
there's a whole host of diseases that are caused, I think, where glyphosate's a causal factor. And it depends in part on your genetics. If you happen to already have a kind of defective version of that enzyme, it might be fine. It's kind of working, 80%. But then
Uh-huh.
when you add glyphosate to it, it gets below a threshold and you get sick.
Uh-huh.
And so
Uh-huh.
depending on your genetics. So I think that a different people's genetics dictates which disease they'll get, but everybody gets sick,
Uh-huh.
if they have
Uh,
enough exposure.
mm. Yeah, so you really, if someone kind of feels right now that they might be eating too much of that, it's kind of not too late. They can still stop. It's going to be much better if they continue, right? Because honestly, especially in the US, I see this. I mean, the food that kind of the average American person eats is honestly very different to, I don't know, this Mediterranean diet,
Oh, I
like
know. I love the
lots of
Mediterranean diet,
fruits,
actually.
lots
I think
of,
that's
yeah, exactly.
exactly what I aim for when I eat. Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm partially from Sardinia, so it's
Oh,
kind of the
yes.
the home of the Mediterranean diets. I mean, there, my grandfather is literally 92 years old now, in
Wonderful.
Sardinia,
Yes.
and he's not going anytime soon. I can tell you that. They really have
Yes.
strong genes up there, and I believe it's really the food. It's the good air and it's the food that they eat, and I mean, he doesn't eat healthy. He doesn't eat unhealthy. He just eats normally. And this is what's interesting in all of these blue zones. You see, these are the people, and kind of where they grow the oldest. These are the people that just eat, well, food that is kind of untouched. In Sardinia,
Exactly. Minimal
there's no big
processing.
company spraying anything or nothing.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
it's
and
just
it's
raw
probably
and
organic
organic.
also.
Of
Yeah, I think
course.
that's so crucial. It's so simple, really, in my opinion, to have a
Mm-hmm.
healthy diet. It's just, avoid the processed foods
Mm-hmm.
and, don't eat the chips and the cookies and the,
Mm-hmm.
soy protein bars and,
Mm-hmm.
candy. I mean, not don't eat, but just eat less of
Yeah,
those things.
minimize. Yeah.
And if they're organic, it's much better. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, lots of whole foods, lots of fiber. Fiber turns out to
Mm-hmm.
be really a big deal because and I've been studying that recently.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the gut microbes, metabolize the fiber. Our own cells don't know what to do with it, but the gut microbes turn it into extremely useful nutrients
Mm-hmm.
by processing it, and they produce these short chain fatty acids, which are extremely healthy food for the colonocytes lining the gut. So when those and glyphosate disrupts the microbes that produce those short chain fatty acids, so they become deficient, and then the gut becomes sick. It's like you're not feeding your gut well
Mm-hmm.
when you don't eat enough fiber and when you're exposed to glyphosate. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
exposed to glyphosate, the fiber is probably problematic because the microbes can't break it down. So, you need to keep your gut microbiome healthy, which is so crucial for the host's health. The microbes do an incredible amount for the host. It's just mind-boggling how much we depend upon them. in a way, I think of us as a sort of home for the microbes. Our purpose in life is to provide a very nice environment for the microbes to be able to thrive, and they don't thrive well when we poison ourselves. We poison them too, and once they don't thrive, we don't thrive. There's a huge
Uh-huh.
connection, gut-brain axis, and even the gut interacting with other parts of the body as well. It's incredible how important a healthy microbiome is to the host health. And in America, almost nobody has a healthy gut, because we've got all these poisons around everywhere, not just in the food. It's in as I
Yeah.
said, in the rain, often in the drinking water.
You
You're
know,
breathing it in the air.
for me, it's very interesting. When I was really having these high glyphosate levels, every time I was eating, no matter how big or small the portion was, I felt so incredibly full. I had the food here, every
Ah,
time.
interesting.
And really, when I kind of switched to a healthier diet and to a more organic diet, it completely went away. Now, honestly, I can eat, well, I could literally destroy a pizza full of oil and like really objectively, I should feel horrible after it, but I don't. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not sure if it's only that. Maybe it's kind of the whole switch, but it just goes such a long way. If you have kind of a healthy, microbiome, it's just gonna help you. It's not gonna hurt you.
Right. And
Yeah.
seafood is a very healthy choice as well. It has a
Mm.
lot of vitamins and minerals. You're looking for nutrient-dense foods, and not just the
Uh-huh.
calories, but the
Uh-huh.
micronutrients. As I said, the vitamins, the minerals.
Uh-huh.
Very important to get enough of them, and you want to get it through diet, not through pills, I believe.
Mm. Uh-huh. And now let's say, I don't know, someone does this for 40, 50 years, really well, standard American diet, SAD, sad, right? Very sad.
Very sad.
And yeah, very sad, I think. What's going to happen to them? And what do you think, like which part is glyphosate? What is just, well, the overall unhealthy diet overall? Like, how would you categorize that?
Yeah,
And what's the worst thing that can happen? I mean,
I can
death
tell
probably.
you the list of disease. Yeah, death for sure. Well, there's a
Yeah.
huge list of diseases that are. So one of the things that I've done in my studies, and I collaborated with other people doing this, is to look for, looking at data on the web from the government
Uh-huh.
on, like for example, hospital discharge data to look at the. They have a whole list of the diseases and conditions that the person suffers from when they leave the hospital, and you can
Uh-huh.
collect all that data over time, and you can draw plots of how many, looking at the prevalence going up over time and draw that plot. And then you can also get glyphosate usage on corn and soy crops. So you could get that from the web as well. It's all open, available to anybody. And so we just looked at those plots. It was Nancy Swanson and I did a lot of collaboration many years ago. We published several papers with these plots, and it's just incredible. We pulled out the list of diseases that were also going up exactly in step with glyphosate, and there's a
Uh-huh.
huge list. It's really, really impressive. And I can give you some of them. IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, of course, right, because it's disrupting the gut microbiome, killing off the beneficials. The pathogens overgrow. That causes an
Uh-huh.
immune response, causes inflammation, and you get inflammatory bowel disease. So that's one that's going up perfectly in step with glyphosate. But then you
Uh-huh.
also have obesity, diabetes. You have Alzheimer's and autism. Of course, autism is a perfect match. It's going up dramatically, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. And then Parkinson's disease, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease,
Uh-huh.
thyroid cancer, pancreatic cancer, celiac disease. Celiac disease matches well with glyphosate usage on wheat, which makes sense
Uh-huh.
because it's a wheat problem. And I think that glyphosate is the reason why we have so many people who can't eat wheat. It's amazing in this
Uh-huh.
country how many people are gluten intolerant, and I think
Uh-huh.
that's directly a consequence of the glyphosate in the wheat.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so there's all of that, and I'm starting now to figure out the diabetes issue, diabetes and obesity. That one stumped me for a long time, as far as the mechanism by which glyphosate might cause that. Turns out to be quite complicated, but I'll try to simplify it because it's quite interesting, and I only recently figured this out. There's a microbe called Akkermansia mucinophila. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's not too many people have
Absolutely
probably
not.
heard of it. Yeah, it's something that they've only recently discovered. It's, because the gut microbiome is super complicated and everyone's is unique. And when you read these papers, your eyes glaze over because you've got these pretty charts with all these colors and all these names that are unpronounceable, to try to tease through all of that to figure out where's the story here. It's quite difficult, but I'm making headway on it. And Akkermansia turns out to be a very important species in the gut. it actually eats one thing, which is the actual sulfomucins that the colonocytes make. So there's these cells called goblet cells lining the gut that make these sulfomucins, which line the gut and which protect the gut and sort of keep the bacteria out. Protect, you basically can get a leaky gut if that barrier is not healthy. So
Uh-huh.
those cells make these sulfomucins, and then the Akkermansia eat that. That's the only thing they eat. So it's kind of amazing that they're sort of the host is feeding the microbes with this food that this Akkermansia loves. Akkermansia eats that, and then it's just like the ones that eat the fiber. It gets turned into butyrate, and butyrate is the favorite food of the colonocyte. So there's a whole cycle where the host is feeding the microbes, and the microbes are feeding the host in a
Uh-huh.
circle, right? The
Uh-huh.
microbes are converting what the host makes into something the host likes to eat. So that's quite interesting to me. That whole system keeps the gut healthy. Well, it turns out glyphosate suppresses Akkermansia, and I was so thrilled it's only recently that I found that paper. I was like, okay, maybe glyphosate is because they were saying people who have all these diseases, they have this problem, no Akkermansia. Sure enough, I found a paper that showed that glyphosate suppresses Akkermansia. And
Uh-huh.
so when that microbe is not available, and you would think that because Akkermansia eats the sulfomucins that they would be depleted, but actually it's the reverse. If the Akkermansia are there and they're taking away the sulfomucins, but they're providing such great nutrients to the host that the sulfomucins are being made in even greater abundance
Uh-huh.
than to compensate for it being eaten, if you know what I mean. So actually you have a
Uh-huh.
healthier thicker layer protecting the gut if you have Akkermansia, which is quite
Yeah.
surprising because it's eating it, right? You'd think it would be
Uh-huh.
depleted, but that whole system works beautifully when the Akkermansia are healthy. But if they're not, it doesn't. So Akkermansia actually produces a molecule called P9, and this is something also very recently learned, which stimulates the gut to release a hormone called GLP-1. And GLP-1 has been in the headlines lately because it's the one that has these analogs that are half the country's taking. We have like 10% of the population in America that are on this drug, which is an injection. Um,
Uh-huh.
it's called Wegovy and Ozempic.
Uh,
Have you heard of these?
yeah, yeah,
Wegovy,
yeah,
Ozempic. And
yeah.
so we have such a huge problem with obesity in this country.
Uh-huh.
And obesity they discovered obesity as a consequence of having insufficient GLP-1. Well, you
Uh-huh.
don't have GLP-1 if you don't have Akkermansia, right? Because and
Uh-huh.
actually butyrate stimulates it as well. So both the butyrate and the Akkermansia help to encourage the gut to make the GLP-1, which then
Uh-huh.
goes to the pancreas and signals it to go ahead and release the insulin, and then that
Uh-huh.
protects you from diabetes. So both the diabetes and the obesity, I believe, can be traced back to this Akkermansia problem. And
Uh-huh.
the general problem of not being able to produce enough butyrate, because that's also glyphosate was shown in studies to reduce the supply of acetate, which is a precursor to butyrate in the gut. So we're finding the papers that support to explain how glyphosate could mechanistically be causing these, having to do with disrupting the gut microbiome.
Uh-huh.
And that's how you get the diabetes and the obesity, both of which are going up dramatically exactly in step with glyphosate.
I'd like to go one step back, actually, the study you mentioned. So basically, you were checking the hospital discharges, right? And you were kind of drawing the line between, okay, how much, well, glyphosate that person has in their blood
No,
or
not
wherever it is.
individually. No, it's
Not
completely at
individually.
the population level. At
Ah,
the
okay.
population level. And we got
I
pushback
see.
because people would say, "Oh, correlation doesn't mean causation." That was the thing
Yeah.
we heard over and over again.
Uh-huh.
Correlation
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean causation. And that's true. Things can
Uh-huh.
be correlated without a causal relationship. But when you
Uh-huh.
see glyphosate correlated, and first of all, you see all these diseases are going up. So you have to say,
Uh-huh.
okay, if it's not glyphosate, what is it? You know? And
Uh-huh.
there's a simple solution,
Uh-huh.
Coxham's razor, that says glyphosate's causing all of them. And I think that's true, actually. And of course, we have all these other things that we're exposed to, which are also causing us to be sick. So it's not like it's the only
Uh-huh.
thing that's causing these, but it is a causal factor, I believe, in all of those conditions that I just named. I believe it's a
Because
causal factor.
I guess there's two ways you can look at this, and I don't have the answer for sure, but I just kind of that's how I look at it from far. The first is okay, all the bad things we do, well, eat and don't exercise and all of that, kind of causes all the diseases, and
Yes,
then for some reason in the bad food, lots of this glyphosate is kind of
yes,
present, and that's kind of there. But in reality, it's a mix of all. And the other reason could be it's really that causing it. And
right.
I'd like to understand, what is the current scientific understanding? What kind of is for the first argument? What's for the second argument? What's still theory? What's kind of still really in research? What's already proven? I'd like to kind of holistically draw the landscape. Like, what do we know already? What do we maybe not know yet? And so on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, glyphosate, it causes, is very disruptive of the gut microbiome, and gut microbiome is very important for so many things. So right there, you have to think glyphosate is going to play a role. But I agree with you that there are a lot of other things that we don't do right. And of course, there are a lot of other chemicals that we're exposed to from agriculture. But glyphosate really stands out because it's the only one that I can think of. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's an insecticide that's also going up dramatically, but the other herbicides are all going down. So if you're going to say it's atrazine or it's glyphosate, those are other herbicides. You can't say that because they're not going up; they're going down because we replaced them all with glyphosate. So we reduce the exposure to all these other chemicals while increasing the exposure to glyphosate. So glyphosate is the only one that correlates in terms of its pattern over time. That makes it stand out. There was a study on Parkinson's disease, and they were looking at agricultural workers, and the various chemicals. They're exposed to lots of chemicals, right? And so they had all these different chemicals, and they were looking at the correlation with the chemicals and the rate of Parkinson's disease. And they found that pretty much lots of them increased the risk to Parkinson's, maybe 1.2, so 20% increased risk to Parkinson's disease. And then they did something where if the farmer is exposed to both glyphosate and something else, all these different chemicals in combination, they were able to do some mathematics to correct for the other things that they were also exposed to at the time that they were exposed to this particular chemical. For each chemical, they did that, right? And after they did that, glyphosate went up and the other ones went down. In other words, glyphosate was probably a contributing factor in the exposure to the other one because it was there as well. And so glyphosate stood out as being the one that would be most likely to be causing the Parkinson's disease. And it's also going up dramatically, exactly in step with Parkinson's disease.
And what kind of study could be designed to kind of solve this question one for all? And I don't know, what I have in my head right now is you kind of want to not isolate by what they eat, So I don't know, try to get, I don't know, a couple of thousands people eating super unhealthy, but at least kind of organic, but still super unhealthy. And then in another thousands of groups, I don't know, eat also very unhealthy, but with this glyphosate. And then you could kind of figure out, okay, after, I don't know, 10, 20 years, here's what this group has, here's what that group has. And if then really, the one group that takes glyphosate has all the bad stuff and the other ones have, well, significantly less, that would kind of be a good indicator. I don't know. I've never designed a study, so you can tell me if this is brilliant or foolish.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, I think you could have 4 groups, right? One is eating, processed foods, heavily processed foods, non-organic, and then eating heavily processed foods, organic, and then eating unprocessed foods, lots of whole foods, non-organic, and eating lots of whole foods, organic. So if you had those 4 groups, you could probably do something interesting as far as comparing their health.
Has anyone ever done this or not?
Well, how do you set that up, right? It's sort of like you have to kind of, I mean, the people have done things where they have a questionnaire. They have done studies with questionnaires and asking people what they eat. And of course, you have to rely on their honesty about what they're eating. There's a lot of variables in there that could mess things up. And but there have been studies like that which have shown that eating a lot of processed foods is bad. We certainly know that. But then you don't know whether it's bad because they're processed or bad because they've got glyphosate in them and other chemicals as well, right? So it's a hard problem. And and any of the studies that they do, to sort of get past the approval, they're always studying, as I said, in isolation, glyphosate in isolation, not even with this formulation, and also not with all the other chemicals that are there on the food because they're being exposed to all these insecticides and fungicides and whatnot, all this other stuff that's there. The red dyes, there's all these things in our processed foods that are not natural. I think synthetic to me is a very important word that I feel you should not eat anything that's synthetic.
I
and
agree.
that even includes synthetic or nutrients. So that's something that I've found very interesting lately because I only learned this recently too, and I will share this with you because it's really interesting. When you take supplements, I actually don't like supplements and I don't like pills because I know that those pills, the capsule contains glyphosate. My friend Anthony Samsel actually tested for the glyphosate in those capsules and found it there.
Kind of the silicone ones that people take.
Yeah, though it's a I guess it's collagen. I think it's sourced from collagen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a
Mm-hmm.
gel
Yeah,
cap,
yeah, yeah.
right? Those gel caps,
Mm-hmm.
animal-based gel caps, because you can also
Mm-hmm.
get vegetable-based. For
Mm-hmm.
vegans, take gel caps that are vegan, vegan gel caps.
Mm-hmm.
But and I don't know if the vegan ones might have glyphosate as well. But Anthony tested the gel cap, and it was contaminated with glyphosate. So every time you take one of those gel caps, you're probably getting a dose of glyphosate. And some people take a lot of pills, that have different
Mm-hmm.
kinds of nutrients inside them. But the other question is the nutrient itself that's inside, and is that synthetic or is that natural? And people think it's the same either way, but it's not, and that is extremely interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in fact, there's a choline. Choline is an animal-based molecule that's actually very good for you. It feeds into the methylation pathways, and the methylation pathways are very important for health.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a study that looked at people who ate a lot of choline-containing foods, like eggs, for example, and meats, choline-containing foods, versus people who took a choline-containing pill, which was choline bitartrate, synthetic choline. So it's
Mm-hmm.
natural versus synthetic. And the synthetic choline raised the levels of a metabolite called TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, in the blood. TMAO turns out to be a marker for all kinds of diseases, especially heart disease, but liver problems, heart disease, even brain problems. Amazing, actually, TMAO and the kidneys. I mean, it's an interesting marker that they've only discovered fairly recently, and there've been a lot of studies on it lately, and I'm looking at it right now
Mm-hmm.
because the synthetic version produced the TMAO and the natural version did not. And so it's quite confusing because you think it's the same thing. They're both choline. So what's the mystery? What's the answer? I think I found the answer, and the answer is extremely interesting, which is deuterium. The choline that's natural is low in deuterium, and the choline that's synthetic is not. And in fact, the original study that showed this relationship with the TMAO, it used they made a version of choline that was incredibly enriched in deuterium. So I have to tell you what deuterium is. Deuterium is heavy hydrogen,
Mm-hmm. Please.
and heavy water,
Uh-huh.
is heavy, has the hydrogen that's deuterium. Deuterium has an extra neutron. Hydrogen is the smallest atom, one proton, one electron. It's the most common atom in the body by far,
Mhm.
and it's attached to all the carbon molecules, carbon atoms in your food. Right? It has hydrogen attached to it. Deuterium is very toxic to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria produce the energy for the cell. And the whole system is geared towards keeping deuterium out of the mitochondria. And the body has very sophisticated mechanisms to do that. And one of them is the gut microbes. And the gut microbes actually produce very low deuterium nutrients for the host. And that's the butyrate. The butyrate is low in deuterium. And the microbes do that by cycling through molecular hydrogen. So it's very fancy. They take the fiber, they metabolize it, they produce carbon dioxide, and they produce hydrogen gas. And then they use the hydrogen gas and the carbon dioxide to make new molecules that are low in deuterium because the hydrogen gas is low in deuterium. And that's a trick that the microbes use to produce this low deuterium food, which then feeds the mitochondria of the colonocytes to keep them healthy. Is this making sense to you? I know it's a little bit technical.
It does when it's technical, but I think I get the high level concept. Yes.
Yes. And so the choline is actually, when you trace back choline, its contents, you can see that it's going to be a very low deuterium nutrient if it's made by the microbes.
Mhm.
And the microbes, in collaboration with the human cells, they make the choline. The choline is low in deuterium, and then the choline has these methyl groups that feed into the methylation cycles, and those are low in deuterium. So the entire methylation system is low in deuterium. And if it's not, the body's worried. And so what's so
Uh-huh.
fascinating to me is that when you take choline that has a lot of deuterium in it, the body produces this TMAO as a consequence of that. Because the TMA doesn't get metabolized by the gut microbes, it goes to the liver, becomes TMAO, becomes toxic, and it's a signal to the body as a whole. We've got a problem because there's too much deuterium in the methylation pathways. And then actually the TMAO shuts down the methylation pathways. It's so fascinating. It's kind of like, oh gosh, we can't let these methyls get loose because they're loaded with deuterium. It's going to kill the mitochondria. I mean, I sort of
Uh-huh.
think of these things as having brains, because
Uh-huh.
it's so sophisticated in the system. It's beautiful. But that TMAO is really interesting. I'm working on a paper right now that's focused on TMAO, just that one molecule, suggesting that it may be an indicator to the body of a
Mhm.
deuterium problem in the mitochondria,
Mhm.
which is a very, very serious problem systemically. And then the body reacts with various strategies to try to uh, reduce the deuterium load in the mitochondria by disrupting certain pathways that are normally very important. So the thing is, the first paper that showed this TMAO thing. It actually demonstrated TMAO being produced from choline. They actually used a version of phosphatidylcholine, which is what you can take as a supplement. Or phosphatidylcholine is a natural choline, as opposed to a choline that's synthesized in the lab. The natural choline is going to be very low in deuterium. The choline synthesized in the lab will be kind of the average amount of deuterium that you would typically see in the air, in the water, for example. And then but what they fed these mice or rats, I forget which one, in the experiment was deuterium loaded choline. They actually took ethanolamine, phosphatidylethynolamine, and they combined it with methyls, and the methyls were completely loaded with deuterium. So they had methyl is CH3, and choline has these 3 methyls attached to it. This is science, but I'm sorry. It has 3 methyls attached to its nitrogen atom. Each one of those is CH3, so that's 9 protons. They swapped out those 9 protons for deuterons in the experiment, and then they fed the mice these incredibly loaded choline molecules that had incredible amounts of deuterium. It was actually a perfect experiment to show that feeding deuterium into the methylation pathways is a really terrible idea. They did not think that the deuterium had any consequence. They used it as a marker so they could trace it, because you can trace deuterium, you can't trace hydrogen. So they said, oh, well, let's just put deuterium on there so we can trace it, we can find out, we can get the answer. And sure enough, there's all this TMAO. Well, that's because the deuterium was there, because the enzyme that clears the TMA in the gut doesn't like deuterium. It only reacts if it's a proton there. So it's actually selecting for the versions of TMA that contain protons and not deuterons. And so it ends up pulling away all the TMA that contains protons, leaving behind deuterium-enriched TMA, which goes to the liver, becomes TMAO, becomes toxic. So I think the whole system is really remarkable. I'm really excited about this because I feel like it's a breakthrough concept to explain. They discovered something which was a consequence of the deuterium that they put into the molecule that they fed the rats. But the fact is, the deuterium was the problem, and they didn't even think about that. In the paper, they had no clue that that was what was causing all this TMAO. So it's really interesting that it's been shown in experiments both that natural choline is much, much healthier than synthetic choline. But this stuff that they fed these rats in this experiment is really toxic because it had a lot of deuterium.
What I really like about you, you're like really the purest form of a scientist, you know. You and that's really what science is about, you know, not accepting the status quo.
Yeah.
Doing experiments, you might be right sometimes, you might be wrong sometimes, but you're really going to push the needle forward. And that's really the last part here. Maybe got a bit technical for me, but that's really what kind of the energy I'm getting from you. You know, we look at stuff, we experiment, we might be right, we might be wrong, and either way, it's going to be fine. You know, but it's really about pushing this, the science forward, putting more dents, you know, in the body of knowledge.
Right.
And
I think
really
actually that we
here.
have a problem in science because we get stuck in points of view that are missing incredibly important parts of the story. And then if someone actually starts to figure out those incredibly important parts, they can't get their paper published because nobody knows about it. And so you can't even find somebody who's an expert to review your paper when you're way out front like we are. This group of people that I work with, we all understand that deuterium is incredibly important in the body and that the microbes are incredibly important for keeping deuterium out of the mitochondria. But most of the researchers in the country don't know anything about deuterium. So how are you going to get your paper reviewed? They don't accept things that they think are kind of wacky or sort of too far-fetched, you know? And yet there's pieces of biology that are totally missing from the picture. And you'll never figure it out if you don't embrace those. And so I'd like to be creative about ideas, try them on, and then look at the research literature to see if it can fit. And same thing with glyphosate. I just looked at all the different ways in which you could make it match that glyphosate would be causal in this disease that it is going up with, you know, and you can find it just like with the Akkermansia. It took me a long time to find the diabetes and obesity story, and I'm really happy about it because I think it's true. And I want to explain all these diseases that glyphosate causes. Glyphosate is a train wreck for deuterium because it messes up the gut microbiome. And so we have a systemic problem in the country with deuterium overload in the mitochondria, which causes mitochondrial dysfunction, which is associated with all these diseases that are going up dramatically. So that's kind of the big picture. And I'm super excited about it, but we have a lot of trouble getting our papers published. So it's a
Well,
struggle.
I think it takes time, you know. At first they think people are crazy, and then these oftentimes end up being the people who actually move the needle forward, in history.
Yeah. You
So
have breakthroughs, you
yeah.
have revolutions in science, and I think we're in the
Mhm.
middle of one right now, and I hope I
Yeah.
live long enough to see it come to fruition. I really hope I do. I'm trying
Yeah.
hard to get enough people interested to get more people studying it because there's not enough research that's been done. I have to work from the papers that the people who are doing the studies are producing.
Mhm.
So I rely on others to get the data to me so I can figure out the story, but I can't. I'm not doing the experiments myself. It's all just my
Yeah.
brain, and reading papers. And it's a fun project. It's a giant puzzle, and I love puzzles. So this has really kept me quite happy.
Well, I mean, you seem pretty sharp, I think you might be 2 or 3 years older than me, right? So I think you seem pretty sharp for that, honestly.
Yeah,
It's
I
pretty
worry
good.
about that because we have a lot of people who are older with dementia. I mean, we have a huge
Mhm.
epidemic in dementia. Actually, that's one of the conditions that's going up dramatically, along with glyphosate. And I think that's because actually of too much deuterium in the mitochondria in the brain. And
Well, I have a good news for you. I don't see any signs of dementia with you. I think I can
thank you.
confirm this after our conversation. Now, maybe my last question for today. What would you like the listeners to really completely rethink after listening to all of that?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I just hope that they appreciate the importance of good food. I think that
Mhm.
spend money on food and you will save money on health. I think that's absolutely true. So buy top of the line organic eggs, from chickens that are healthy living outdoors. I mean, it's just like uh, everything should be high end when you buy food,
Mhm.
and it'll be worth it in terms of your savings on costs for health, but also just feeling good, which is so much more
Mhm.
important than the cost. But in America, we have the cheapest food probably among all the industrialized countries. Maybe not so much
Mhm.
anymore. Our food prices have gone up a lot in the last few years,
Mhm.
but we have cheap food, and then we have incredibly expensive health. We spend way more per person on healthcare than any other country in the world, and we don't
Mhm.
have good health. We die young. We have a lot of chronic diseases. We're not succeeding. We've got something very broken in our system, and I think our new government understands that. And I'm really glad to see
Mhm.
that. I've been so frustrated with the government ignoring the autism problem, which has been going up and up and up. And if we keep it going, we're going to be in a disastrous situation in 10 years.
Mhm.
It will be
Mhm.
disastrous. Like people will be afraid to have children because they're worried about producing an autistic child. And
Mhm.
we'll probably the population will implode. I mean, this is what I'm predicting is that first of all, infertility is going way up. So
Mhm.
people won't be able to have kids and they won't want to have kids because they'll be so worried about having an autistic child, which will completely change their life, you
Mhm.
know? And then the population will implode because once you're not able to replace yourselves, you're toast. I mean, eventually you'll just disappear. It's only
It's
a
what's
matter of
happening right
time.
now.
It
I just
is
saw
many countries. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in Switzerland, they just studied, kind of put out the numbers. I think 1.7 children per woman, something like this. So already below 2.1,
Yeah.
right, which we actually need.
Right. I know.
And I think South Korea, was it right? 1.2 or 1.3. Like
Right.
that's ridiculously low. That's in 50 years or in 70 years, South
Yeah.
Korea is going to be a ghost town.
Right,
That's
exactly,
math.
unless you start importing,
Well,
uh,
yeah, exactly.
America keeps its population up through bringing in immigrants, but we're
Yeah,
trying to close the door on that now, so we're
yeah,
probably gonna
yeah,
implode, because 'cause we're not keeping up with the reproductive rate. We will
yeah.
disappear. Anytime it's below 2.0, it's just a matter of time you're gone,
Yep.
and maybe the entire human species, will not, be able to sustain itself once it gets to where we can't reproduce ourselves. I think
Mhm.
it's a serious threat. Extinction
Mhm.
is a serious threat, and I
Mhm.
I really think if we can improve our food supply and healthy lifestyle, getting the exercise, getting out in the sunlight. I want to emphasize that because I really believe in sunlight as a healing
Mhm.
influence, and God gave us the sun really, and we need to take advantage of it because it's a source of energy and it really keeps you healthy to get a lot of
Mhm.
sunlight exposure.
Mhm. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's the basics that kind of make us healthy. Don't eat crap food. And
Yes,
if you eat crap food, at least make sure it's organic, right? Go
right.
out, be healthy, move.
Yes,
And
yes,
yeah, we
exactly.
all need to do much more of that. And I think that's a very solid advice to kind of end today's episode. So yeah, Stephanie,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much
Mhm.
for coming today. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.